Hello my friends, in this video we'll be taking a look at the autosomal DNA results, predicted phenotype traits, and GD match results of a Kura Araxes individual from the early Bronze Age from Berkaber in Turkey. Now let me show you where, actually not in Turkey, from Armenia, from this location right here in Berkaber, in the very northeast of Armenia in the Caucasus. Now Kura Araxes was a Bronze Age, early Bronze Age culture that kind of existed right here in Armenia, Georgia, and even a little bit in Dagestan. So this individual is from the Armenian part of the Kura Araxes culture. They contributed to the ethnogenesis of people in the Caucasus, sort of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan region, and even peoples of the Levant. They contributed to the ethnogenesis of a lot of peoples. And this individual is among there was a couple of other samples that this commenter suggested I make videos on, but this is the highest quality sample, and the other samples that were suggested, I don't think I will be covering them. They are rather low quality, so this is, out of those 4 samples that the commenter suggested, this will be probably the only sample I will be covering. But there were 4 samples from Berkabiar, and this is the one sample from Berkabiar that is quite high coverage. That's quite well genotyped, and let's get into his results. First, we're gonna look at his Y-DNA. His Y-DNA, actually, with my trait predictor, is determined to be J1. But if we want a more precise subclade, it's actually JZ1842. And if you want to see where JZ1842 is commonly found, this is where this subclade is most commonly found. It is most commonly distributed in places like the Caucasus and Dagestan. Actually, is that Dagestan? That looks like very north of Dagestan, and even a little bit of. This looks like, I don't even know what is that called. Is that I forget what this is called. Kalmykia, I think that's Kalmykia. Yes, so Dagestan, Kalmykia, very interesting. So here it's a little bit in the very south of Kazakhstan, near Shymkent. Here is a little bit in Turkmenistan. All these Turkic regions. So it looks like this particular branch of J1 looks like a Turkic branch of J1, but it looks like it's found at very small frequency in all of these regions. As you can see, the relative frequency, it's 24%. Actually, that's very high. Wait, let me set the frequency a little bit higher. Now it's 16%. Okay, but let me set it higher still. Now it's 7%. Wait, no, it's low. It's low. I just don't see very well. So 7% is the highest frequency here. Okay. Let me set it lower at 27%. Okay. Um, so it's quite low frequency. It doesn't show up. It's not a very frequent haplogroup, just to put it this way. And his mitochondrial lineage is N1B1. So his mitochondrial DNA that's passed down from his mom to from his grandma to his mom to him on his X chromosome is N1B1A. And his mitochondrial lineage, it is lost forever, because he is not gonna pass this down to anybody. He is not capable of passing this down to his children. It is lost forever. So his mitochondrial lineage is N1B1A, and this is where his mitochondrial lineage is most commonly found. As you can see, it is most commonly found in Egypt. It is also slightly present in looks like Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. What's interesting about this mitochondrial lineage, it is also a little bit present in Canada somehow. I wonder if it is Canadians or if it is native Inuits who have this lineage. Um, it is probably Canadians. It is probably French Canadians who have this lineage, not Inuits. But nonetheless, it is interesting that it shows up in Canada in this region. Um, it shows up a little bit in northwest of Africa. Are there any other anomalies? It shows up a little bit in right here in this region of northeastern Afghanistan. Also quite interesting. Let's see. Let's set the intensity a little bit lower, which will make the relative frequency, I think, higher, right? So if you set the intensity lower, then you see that it is mostly localized in Egypt. So it's kind of an Egyptian mitochondrial haplogroup, mostly in the Egyptian lineage. Definitely quite interesting. Okay, let's close that. Now let's see what he scores for the ethnic calculator results with my trait predictor. We're gonna see that he scores closest to, based on 449 SNPs, closest to Bactrians, followed by Sarazm in Neolithic from Tajikistan, followed by Afghan medieval, followed by Kafkas medieval individuals from Anapa, followed by that is Erfurt Jew, and then Sarmatians from the Urals, then Volga Burtas. Very, very interesting, quite accurate, quite actually, quite spot on. Sort of. It identified him as a West Asian person, which is more than you could ask for from a calculator with 449 SNPs. And 10 closest models is Volga Merians plus Natufians, Merians plus BMAC, Yamne plus Algerian, Yamne plus Levant Chalcolithic, Yamne plus Natufian, Yamne plus BMAC. Very interesting. I mean, it's okay. The models are all looking quite okay. All the models are looking quite okay. Let's look at what he scores with Eugene's K13. So here, of course, we are getting a much more accurate, much more precise result because you can look at the S&P count for 13, actually 136,000 SNPs. Obviously, much more precise result. And we're seeing 53% West Asian, 25% East Mediterranean. Looks like a typical person from the west of Caucasus. And he's scoring like a mixture of Abkhazian plus Iranian Jew or Abkhazian plus Iranian. Basically, very typical result for somebody from the west of Caucasus. His closest populations are Abkhazians and Georgians. Actually, Kurds come up at third closest population, but the distance to Kurds is quite high, 15 point distance. It's quite high distance to Kurds. Overall, he's closest to Abkhazians. So this person, this Kura Araxes individual person, is quite close to Abkhazians. When it comes to deeper, more deep and ancient admixtures, this is what he scores with MDLP World K11E. So let's kind of dissect this result a little bit. He's scoring 35.7% EHG, which here is not really EHG. Here it's more of a Caucasus hunter-gatherer CHG component. So really he is 35.7% Caucasus hunter-gatherer. The majority of his ancestry is Caucasian, Caucasus hunter-gatherer admixture. The second group that he scores is Neolithic, which is very self-explanatory. It's Neolithic farmer admixture. The third group that he scores is Basal, which is kind of like Natufian or very very southern. It's even more southern than Natufian a little bit because Natufians score a mixture of Basal and Neolithic with this calculator. The fourth group that he scores is Iran Mesolithic, which is kind of like a more southern version of Iranian Neolithic as well. So because Iranian Neolithic scores a mixture of EHG and Iran Mesolithic, so once again, he's really scoring typical stuff for a person from Western Asia. What's interesting is that he's scoring only 1% WHG, and WHG is a component that's meant to represent European hunter-gatherer admixture. I was expecting him to score a lot more of this component. You can see he's scoring only 1.09% WHG, and I was expecting him to score maybe 5, maybe 6% of this component instead of 1. So really, he doesn't have any European hunter-gatherer admixture whatsoever, and it's kind of surprising that with the other calculators and with the other oracles, he was scoring closest to like Abkhazians and various North Caucasians when he doesn't have any European hunter-gatherer admixture whatsoever. So that's definitely quite interesting. He's also scoring 4% ASI and 2.5% African, which you can attribute that to error. You can attribute that to little quirks of the calculator. You can attribute that um, to anything, but really it's just that's quite interesting as well. But only 1% European hunter-gatherer admixture is definitely quite surprising. Now let's move on to what he scores for Nashakot, what he looks like, and what diseases he has, what predispositions to various diseases he has. Let's see what he scores for Nashakot. So it looks like he actually has brown eye color. Although he also has quite significant likelihood for hazel eyes, so he has brown or hazel eye color. Just based on the likelihood distribution for eye color, I think he's gonna be heterozygous for blue eye haplotype 2, because he's scoring very high for hazel eyes. He's also scoring very high for blue eyes with a neighbor center and green eyes. I mean, he's just scoring very high likelihoods for all of these light eye colors. He's still scoring very high for brown eyes, and he's most likely got brown eyes. But just the fact that he's scoring 7% for the likelihood of blue eyes with a neighbor center tells me that he's got a lot of alleles for depigmentation, a lot of variants for depigmentation. For hair color likelihood distribution, he most likely has black or dark brown hair. That's very decisive. There is pretty much no likelihood of any hair color besides lighter than dark brown or black. That's very decisive. 55% for black, 43% for dark brown. For skin color likelihood distribution, looks like he has light brown or olive skin tone. That's also very, very decisive. And for hair texture, it looks like his hair texture is wavy or curly, and straight or kinky is less probable. But that's kind of very indeterminate. For nose shape, looks like he definitely has a Greek nose shape. That's quite robustly determined, very well determined. So he has a Greek nose shape. As you can see, the nose shape is Greek. Greek is on the left here, snub is on the right here. And for the pigmentation variants, it looks like he does not have blue eye haplotype 3. He does have blue eye haplotype 2. He has heterozygous genotype here, but he actually has 2 light color variants in this variation. So he does have blue eye haplotype 2, and he has heterozygous genotype and blue eye haplotype 1. That's definitely quite interesting. So once again, if we go back to this premise that you gotta have Western hunter-gatherer ancestry to have blue eye haplotype 2, this individual does not have any Western hunter-gatherer ancestry, and he has this kind of a genotype here. So once again, he completely breaks this premise. 2 light color variants in this variation of SLC24A5. No light color variants in this variation of SLC45A2, definitely very exotic. Dark pigmentation of eyes, hair, and skin that contributes to pigmentation of hair mostly, but also eyes and skin. And he actually has 1 light color variant for ginger hair in MC1R, which is definitely quite interesting. Okay. Let's see what he scores for the phenotype oracle. And for the phenotype oracle, he is scoring closest to this, which is kind of like a Mediterranean, West Asian looking phenotype, followed by this, which is another Mediterranean or West Asian looking phenotype, followed by this, which is another Mediterranean or West Asian looking phenotype. And for the mixtures of phenotypes, he's getting modeled as a mixture of 50% this plus 50% this, followed by 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 50% this plus 50% this. The closest mixture is this. Okay. All right. Now let's go and move on to the biomarkers panel, and then we're going to move on to the polygenic and monogenic traits. So moving on to the biomarkers panel, he got a below average level of vitamin D, a slightly above average level of LDL cholesterol, slightly below average level of HDL cholesterol. That's bad. Both of these predispositions are bad. Slightly below average level of glucose, slightly above average level of hemoglobin, slightly below average blood pressure, slightly below average level of iron in blood. So he does not have hemochromatosis. That's good to see. Slightly below average level of sex hormone binding globulin, slightly below average level of red blood cell count in blood, slightly above average number of base pairs for the telomere length, which is good to see, and slightly below average height. Okay. Let's see for the polygenic risk scores. What does he score here? So here it looks like he has average odds for migraine, slightly below average odds for lupus, average odds for gout, average odds for thyroid cancer, average odds for eczema, above average odds for exfoliation glaucoma, slightly above average odds for primary congenital glaucoma, average odds for polycystic ovary syndrome, average odds for cataracts, average odds for age-related macular degeneration, high odds for rheumatoid arthritis, average odds for Tourette's, average odds for epilepsy, average odds for asthma, high odds for leukemia, average odds for vitiligo, below average odds for myopia, average odds for primary biliary cirrhosis, slightly below average odds for stroke, high odds for male pattern hair loss, which is not surprising because he's a European or West Asian. Europeans and West Asians tend to score higher for male pattern hair loss. He's got below average odds for atrial fibrillation, slightly below average odds for deep vein thrombosis, slightly below average odds for unipolar depression, so he's a little bit less likely to be depressed, slightly below average odds for bipolar type 1, below average odds for schizophrenia, high odds for type 2 diabetes. Okay, that's interesting. Below average odds for type 1 diabetes, below average odds for Alzheimer's, below average odds for multiple sclerosis. For breast cancer, he's got 2 risk variants for breast cancer, and they are both in one variation. He's got 12 risk variants for testicular cancer out of 18. That's kind of high, and he's got 2 risk variants in both of the important variations in KLG, which is definitely quite interesting. So he's quite cooked for testicular cancer. For celiac disease, no risk variants for celiac disease. For GSS, no risk variants for GSS. For Crohn's disease, 10 risk variants for Crohn's disease out of 22, which is really high. So that's like really incredibly high. Reifenstein's syndrome, no risk variants for Reifenstein's. For Parkinson's, no risk variants for Parkinson's. Gilbert syndrome, 2 risk variants for Gilbert syndrome. Basal cell carcinoma, no risk variants for that. Jacob Creutzfeldt, no risk variants for that. Vardenberg syndrome, no risk variants for that. Treacher-Collins syndrome, he does have some risk variants for that, which is kind of interesting, but they're all common. Pfeiffer syndrome, common risk variants. So he doesn't have any risk variants that aren't common actually, which is really good. But the risk variants for Crohn's are really concerning actually. But none of them are marked as important because the risk variants that are important in Crohn's, I mark them as important, which is good. So that's definitely good to see. So the only things we really have to watch out for here are the score for testicular cancer and for type 2 diabetes. Let's go through the monogenic traits and see what we find here. Looks like he has a predisposition to intermediate phenotype between warrior and warrior, so intermediate dopamine levels and ability to tolerate stress. Looks like he has a predisposition to higher number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain, which means not a no-go learner, and most likely a slight predisposition to such conditions as schizophrenia. He has a predisposition to intermediate levels of 5-HT and serotonin, which means intermediate predisposition to such conditions as anxiety and depression. Okay. And for autism, looks like he has predisposition to intermediate odds of autism. Very interesting. For lactose persistence, looks like he does not carry the European lactose persistence mutation. He doesn't have any of the variants for European lactose persistence. For the empathy gene, looks like he has a predisposition to average level of empathy based on Nice, Forest, and Peace. He has a predisposition to an average level of empathy. For diabetes, we already know he has a very high score for type 2 diabetes, but for type 1 diabetes, his score is below average. For hemochromatosis, not a carrier for the C282Y hemochromatosis mutation. Really good stuff to see. For Alzheimer's, he was scoring below average. For multiple sclerosis, no risk variance in HLA, which is really good to see. For cardiovascular disease panel, he has a predisposition to intermediate odds of cardiovascular issues. So he's intermediate for a lot of these conditions, which is really good stuff. For myopia, he was scoring below average. Yes, this is why, because he has GG here, which leads to a significantly lower risk of myopia and greater quality of eyesight. Because of this genotype, he's scoring below average for myopia. This is the biggest contribution for scoring below average for myopia for him. For facial morphology panel, it looks like he does not have any East Asian genotypes in EDAR, so he's definitely got a European facial morphology. Typical mid-face length, longer mid-face length, intermediate nose size, and slightly thinner eyebrows. He does have one risk allele in HLA for vitiligo, which is definitely quite interesting. He carries micropenis mutation in the miscellaneous section. That's quite interesting. All right, so I see this quite frequently with these samples. So I'm considering that this is probably a problem with genotyping and not a problem with the samples actually carrying micropenis mutation. So I would disregard this, but nonetheless, it's funny. I'm seeing this quite frequently. So carries micropenis mutation. I think we're going to disregard this. Impaired muscle performance, likely endurance athlete rather than sprinter or power athlete. One fat gene variant and FTOs RS 39609, high odds of obesity and sleep apnea. No variants for increased pain sensitivity, and um, risk of heart failure due to beta blocker medications is slightly below average, which is good to see. Um, okay, doesn't carry the cutaneous albinism type 2 mutation. He doesn't have any risk variants for familiar Mediterranean fever. For alcoholism, he's got slightly below average odds for alcoholism. For cancer panel, two risk variants for breast cancer in K118R3. For rare diseases and traits panel, let's see, does he have any conditions that he's predisposed to? He has this gene that which predisposes him to up to 100 times increased odds of tuberculosis infection if exposed to tuberculosis bacterium, and it's also a very uncommon genotype, very, very interesting. He has this genotype which leads to 4.6 times increased odds of ankylosing spondylitis, which is definitely quite interesting. He is also a carrier of a I can't pronounce that, a deficiency allele. Definitely quite interesting. And he also has the genotype which leads to 4.6 times increased risk of ankylosing spondylitis, also quite interesting. So he does have some risks for various conditions, rare conditions. Okay, for allergies, I'm gonna skip that. For HIV and AIDS panel, no protective evidence here. For HLA gene panel, looks like he definitely has lower odds of various autoimmune diseases, which is really good to see. For MTRR gene panel, he has this genotype which corresponds to much higher risk for meningomos and neural tube defects, and to a risk level for disorders of intracellular collagen metabolism. For CBS panel, he has a predisposition to intermediate homocysteine levels, which is quite good. And he does have one risk variant for homocystinuria in CBS gene out of 6 variants identified in the file in total. Let's look it up, actually. We can look it up right now. Let's look it up. Yep, so he's a carrier of a variant for homocystinuria. This might be a miscall, like a genotyping error, once again, as is the case with most of these micropenis mutations. But then again, it might be a genuine genotype that this person has, because I have a genuine genotype that's also a risk variant in this region for homocystinuria. So I don't know. I guess we'll never know. For thyroid cancer, what was he scoring for thyroid cancer? Looks like let's see actually. Let's see. He's scoring spot on average for thyroid cancer. Okay, so for thyroid cancer, we know he's scoring spot on average. For muscular dystrophy myopathies, no risk variance for that. For color blindness panel, 2 risk variants for color blindness in OPN1SW. Definitely some predisposition to being colorblind. For FTO gene panel, no fat gene variants in FTO, but he does have some risk variants for fat gene in these variations right here. He's heterozygous for all of them. However, he does have some genotypes that also protects from obesity, so overall he's probably not all that predisposed to obesity. For syncope panel, based on 1 S&P, his syncope risk is essentially average. For biotraits panel, so much stuff to talk about. So it looks like lower predisposition to anger. I'm gonna pick and choose stuff to talk about out of this information. One copy of the hunter-gatherer CLT-CL1 gene variant and one copy of the farmer variant, which leads to intermediate ability to process carbs and sugars. The farmer allele is C. Um, he's got AG in his variation, which leads to being more able to detect beta iodine floral fragrance. He's got for age-related macular degeneration. What was he scoring for that? Actually, let's scroll back and see that again. Let's scroll back and see that again. He was scoring spot on average for that, and he's got no increased protection from age-related macular degeneration. So overall, it looks like he's got no predisposition or protection from that. For vitamins and levels panel, that might be quite interesting to see. Looks like he's got protection of neurons against glutamate toxicity and increased rate of glutamate degradation. Lower levels of vitamin B12, increased in vitamin B6, predisposed to intermediate levels of vitamin A, in typical levels of vitamin E, which means lower levels of vitamin E, higher or typical levels of vitamin K, and then another genotype for higher levels of vitamin K. Definitely quite interesting. And for blood group panel, looks like his predicted blood type is either blood type O or blood type B. Number one, first place comes blood type O, second place comes blood type B. We don't know for sure what blood type it is, but most likely it's blood type O or blood type B. Unfortunately, it can be quite difficult to determine blood type exactly with the SNPs, especially in a file that's incomplete, doesn't have all the data. In a whole genome sequence file, it's quite easy to determine the blood type, but in a commercial data file like a MyHeritage, 23andMe, Ancestry, it's quite difficult. And in a file like this, where it's not even a commercial data file, in a file where literally it's worse than a commercial data file, where you have to um, where you don't even have all the information that a commercial data file typically has, it can be completely difficult to reconstruct um, the blood type and all the relevant data that you need to determine that stuff. So anyway, with the data that we do have, we can determine that blood type here is most likely type O or type B. Thanks for watching it to the very end. I hope you enjoyed my video. Hope you had some fun. Hope you were entertained. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And of course, the link to download the file that I covered in this video will be in the description of the video. And the tool that I'm using to generate this content, the link to buy that tool, it is currently only $13. Will be in the description of the video as well. On May 22nd, I will increase the price quite significantly, and I will also release the updates that I've been making onto the itch page where I sell my tool. So you will see all the updates that I've been making on the itch page. So currently on the itch page, it is version 12. The tool that I'm selling right now is version 12. On May 22nd, I'm releasing version 13. And instead of $13, it's going to be, I don't know, 24, 25, 26, I don't know, something in the 20s. Anyway, thanks for watching until the very end. Leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.